Hey everyone, Greg Woodward here, and this is your weekly win. We've all heard the saying, what gets measured gets done. It means regular measurement keeps us focused because we use that information to stay on track towards our objectives. As salespeople, we tend to measure our performance based on our goals and quotas. With our profession, these built-in measures help us keep on track and allow us to gauge our performance. For most of us, however, this performance is measured over a specific period of time, usually quarterly, which can sometimes actually hold us back. People, myself included, tend to perform better when they have their back up against the wall, just like before a deadline, for example. It's just a human condition, and to one degree or another, we all have it. When I look across a sales organization, I often see this reality surfacing in the last week of the quarter, when reps have a time frame closing in on them to hit a certain number. In this brief video, we're going to talk about a workflow practice called chunking, and how to use it to crush your quarterly objectives and consistently perform the same way you do when your back is up against the wall as you're approaching a deadline. So what is chunking, and how is it relevant to crushing objectives with outbound prospecting? Well, first, let's understand the psychology behind it. It's very easy to look at goals over a span of time and allocate your energy based on the perceived time that something will take. If I gave you an objective of 5 qualified meetings, for example, how long do you realistically think that would take you? How easy is that objective? Probably pretty easy, right? Now, what if I told you that you had 6 months to get these meetings? How would you feel about that goal? Pretty good? Now, what if I told you you had an hour? How would you feel then? Same task, but it feels different. Why is that? Let's pay attention to how you experienced the two examples. In the first one, when you had 6 months to get the 5 meetings, how did you think about the meetings? Right? Probably as 5 different chunks, 5 individual items. Now, what about the 1 hour example? How did you think about them then? Did you visualize all the steps involved? Maybe each email, each of the calls you'd have to make, the amount of time it would take to research the prospects and so forth? When we look at any objective as one chunk, it usually is because we lack awareness of the steps involved to achieve it. When we have certainty about achieving the outcome, the task seems smaller. Conversely, when we look at the same objective as having multiple chunks, it's because we're aware of the steps involved. Our lack of certainty puts up resistance and makes the task seem bigger. Do you see the difference there? In the first example, you looked at the meetings towards your quota as one unit. In the second, you looked at it as individual components that made up the action of booking a meeting. Our mind does this automatically as we measure an objective, and it allows us to allocate the right amount of time and energy towards them. With this practice of chunking, we want to use this knowledge to our advantage. We can actually hack our own mind by adjusting the time frame we're measuring ourselves against to exceed the objective. When we have 6 months to get 5 meetings, it's easy to look at the amount of time that you have in comparison to the perceived difficulty of the task. Most of us would probably end up waiting until the last month, maybe even week, before really pushing ourselves, similar to how most sales organizations see that push at the end of each quarter. In the 1 hour example, your back is up against the wall from the start, which means you immediately rely on that end of quarter energy to get the task accomplished. Now, this may sound a bit odd, but the secret to crushing a bold objective is not to focus on it, at least not directly. You can't control it directly. Instead, focus on it indirectly by chunking it down into smaller objectives or steps that you can control, and then separate everything and focus all of your effort on executing the smaller steps one at a time with daily point A to point B plans of action. The key takeaway here is when it's a small task, you don't want to make it bigger, but when it's a big task, you want to make it smaller. So it's about executing each smaller step or smaller objective independently from point A to point B, from start to finish. And doing this allows us to make and measure progress in shorter increments. And each time we execute an objective from point A to point B, what's really going on here is we're giving ourselves immediate feedback in the form of progress. And that creates certainty, which gives us momentum towards the larger objective. By creating smaller weekly deadlines as we work towards a larger objective, we allow ourselves to create the same situation as the last week of the quarter. We put our back up against the wall on a weekly basis and perform at our highest level more consistently. Think about what that would mean for you. Think about what that would be like if every week were like the last week of the quarter. Well, by chunking, you can create that situation for yourself more consistently. So if you have a bold objective over the next quarter and you want to leverage chunking to really crush it, Then get out a pen and paper, because here's what you'll need to do, and the good news is it's not complicated. Step 1, get total clarity. Write down the larger objective and date that you need to achieve it by. Write it all down. Step 2, reverse engineer and chunk. Look at the larger objective and the time frame you have to work with, and write down all the steps in sequential order that are necessary to achieve it. For example, 70 meetings over the next quarter might average out to be 24 meetings per month and 6 meetings per week. Then, in terms of workflow, what are the steps that you need to take? And the easiest way to answer this is just by asking yourself, what's standing between me right now and getting 6 meetings this week and 24 meetings this month? For example, maybe I need to build out an ideal prospect list. Maybe I need to create some email sequences, call scripts. Whatever it is, just write it all out. Step 3, design and take massive action. Focus now on the smaller chunks. Identify what activities need to be incorporated into your workflow each week to achieve that objective. These are going to be the recurring activities that generate the greatest returns for you on your time towards the objective. Now, using whatever calendar interface you currently use, set recurring blocks of time for when you're going to execute on each activity during the week. And what you want to do here is batch out each activity in 2 to 4 hour blocks or increments, and then set those times out on a recurring basis for the rest of the quarter. People tend to perform better when they have their back up against the wall, just like before a deadline. And what gets measured gets done. By breaking large objectives into smaller chunks like this, we're creating more deadlines for ourselves inside of a larger picture, and that enables us to make and measure progress in shorter increments. With chunking, what we're really doing is aligning our psychology with our objectives to remove resistance between us and our desired outcome. And when we do that with prospecting, we win.